It's time now for The Clash, in which we tackle a big topic of the day from opposing points of view. Transgender women should not be forced to reduce their testosterone levels to compete in sports, the new International Olympic Committee guidelines have said. This fresh new framework also states that no athlete should be excluded from the competition on the grounds of a perceived unfair and disproportionate advantage due to their gender. The guidelines will replace ones from 2015 and reverses the IOC's previous stance on transgender athletes. Previously, the transgender women athletes were only allowed to compete providing that their testosterone levels were below the required limit 12 months before their first competition. You don't need to use testosterone to decide who can compete at all, said the IOC medical director, Richard Budgett. So is this move an important moment of inclusion for trans women, or is it the death of competitive women's sport? To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome legendary gay rights campaigner and human rights campaigner, frankly, a star of his own Netflix documentary, Being Peter Tatchell, produced by Sir Elton John. It's the one and only Peter Tatchell. Opposite him is Kellie-Jay Keen, the founder of the campaign group Standing for Women. Kellie-Jay, welcome to the programme. What's your view about this latest ruling in regard to testosterone levels?
It's absolutely insane, isn't it? We know that men have an advantage in all sorts of ways due to a variety of their physical bodies. Testosterone is like a supercharge on all of the other advantages. So for the IOC, which is a body that governs how bodies actually participate in sport and perform, for them to suddenly say that a man's feelings is more important than the body he's in when it comes to then entering into female sports is just, I just have no idea what sort of conversations they must have had to reach such a foolish and dangerous conclusion.
What do you think has motivated this decision? Because it doesn't sound like science to me.
I think there's some very, very clever, well-networked individuals that have infiltrated sensible organisations, and now nobody can really speak up, and certainly nobody's talking about women. So when we talk about whether or not these men can participate in women's sports, we're not actually really considering what the outcome will be for women. And as you rightly say or suggest, it will be the death of women's sports.
However, Kellie-Jay, would you not accept that trans women are women and any other view is transphobic?
Absolutely not. Not in a month of Sundays would I ever suggest that men can be women. So no.
Well, Peter Tatchell, what's your view on this? You've been a campaigner for human rights and gay rights for decades now. We've spoken previously on the programme. Your documentary is a must-watch. You're a very principled person, but is this one really a hill to die on?
Well, I am not trans. I don't speak on behalf of the trans community, but I am a trans ally and have been for over 50 years. And that's because I'm a human rights defender. And I know from my experience that trans people are the victims of incredible levels of prejudice, discrimination, harassment, and even violence. So I want to see the trans community defended and respected. When it comes to women's sport, the jury is really out on the advantages of testosterone levels. There is some evidence that they may be influential, but the amount of advantage they give is very disputed. What I would say is that under the old rules, even biological women were penalized by those rules. For example, there were two very great Namibian athletes whose natural testosterone levels were above the IOC levels. So even though they were biological women, they were not allowed to compete. And that was very, very unfair. On the question of advantage, we know that nearly all elite athletes have some kind of advantage. So, for example, if you have fast twitch muscle fibers, that gives you an advantage in sprinting. If you have extra large lungs or hearts, that gives you an advantage in endurance events. Michael Phelps, the multi-Olympic gold medal winner, he had extra long arms, large hands, and large webbed feet, and that gave him an advantage in the pool. So my question is, why are trans people being singled out? Because they may perhaps have some small advantage. I look at athletes. I look at trans athletes I know. They are no bigger physiologically or stronger than biological women. I look at biological women and I see some, for example, in the women's English rugby team who are absolute biological women. They're not trans, but they are big, they are strong, they are heavily muscled, in some cases much more so than their teammates and opposing teams. So I just think we have to be careful, because excluding people from sport is a very dangerous road to go around unless there is really strong, compelling scientific evidence. And right now, there isn't.
Kellie-Jay?
I don't think that anybody who calls himself trans should be excluded from sports. Of course, that would be terrible. And there are categories that men who call themselves trans can compete in, and it's called the men's category. I think what the danger is with the IOC is I wonder what they're waiting for. It's the same with World Rugby, England Rugby, Welsh Rugby. I'm just wondering, are they waiting for the first broken spine, maybe the first fatality of a woman being wrestled to the floor and killed? And Peter has made this example before about large women who play rugby, but the men are much, much larger who also play rugby. 200 of the world's fastest men can beat the world's fastest woman at 100 metres. Serena Williams would be about 700 if she was competing in the men's category. So I think we have to be really clear. It feels quite strange having to have a discussion about whether or not we think men are stronger, that men have more endurance, that men's muscles are infinitely stronger than women's. Each muscle fibre of a man, their bone density, the fact that their hips are not as supple, the fact that they don't menstruate, the fact that women have 1/20th, up to 1/20th of a man's testosterone. I mean, all of these things, common sense, women and men right throughout the UK know that having men competing in women's sports is absolutely outrageous.
And the point is, Peter, you've conflated, I'll let you respond, Peter, but you've conflated the appalling abuse and prejudice towards trans people, which we can all three of us agree is horrific and unacceptable. You conflated that with exclusion from gendered sport, and they are separate things. Look at Caitlyn Jenner, one of the most famous, perhaps the most famous trans woman in the world, and a former Olympic athlete herself, and she said that trans women participating in female sport is wrong. He said it's unfair. She said it's unfair. Forgive me.
Well, I absolutely agree that all sport, including women's sport, must be fair. So I would favour individual assessment, not a generalised ban on trans women, but individual assessment. If someone can be demonstrably shown to have an unfair advantage because of their testosterone levels or any other advantage because they were born biologically male, then I think there is a case where perhaps they should be excluded. But what I really object to is a generalized ban on all trans women, when I know from my own personal networks and friends that there are trans women competing in sports who are physiologically just about the same as the average biological woman in terms of muscle strength, bone density, height and weight. So I don't see any reason why those trans women should be excluded.
But yes,
Peter, let's be fair.
It doesn't matter that, testosterone, muscle mass, you name it. These are all red herrings. The bottom line is that if you listen to Professor Robert Winston, who's one of the most respected experts on reproduction in the country, and this is the man who said on the Question Time programme on the BBC recently that there are just two biological sexes and it's impossible to change your biological sex. Every cell in your body defines you as male or female. So you don't have to do any investigation. You don't have to check someone's pulse or do a blood sample. If they've got a penis and testicles, they're biological male. And if they have a vagina and a cervix, they're female. End of.
Well, I agree. There is such a thing as biological sex, and it's very, very, very important. But there's also another thing called gender identity. And I would say that that is equally legitimate and valid, and that we shouldn't be arguing against one and the other. We should be respecting the difference. Now, biological sex, I understand exactly why many women's campaigners emphasize biological sex. And I do not want to wish that away or pretend it is not important. But I'm simply saying that when it comes to trans women competing in women's sports, I think we need to have a conversation. We need to do more research, more evaluation, and in particular, as I said, shift to individual assessment. Where there is a demonstrable advantage by one particular trans woman who is examined and determined, then of course that would be unfair for that person to have that advantage. But having said that, I still feel uncomfortable because we don't make these distinctions when it comes to people who've got other advantage like extra large hearts and lungs or fast twitch muscle fibers.
But Peter,
we don't make an issue to get them banned.
Peter, why has sport always been segregated along gender lines? Why do men play the best of 5 sets at Wimbledon in the final and women the best of 3? Men are stronger than women.
Well, as a general rule, yes. But I don't think you can generalise. That's the whole point. You can't generalise.
Does that mean, Peter, that only weak trans women should participate in female sport? Just the rubbish ones?
Well, I wouldn't use the term weak trans woman, but I'd say that where trans women do not have a demonstrable, scientifically proven advantage in terms of height, weight, testosterone or other factors, where that can be shown, then there may be a legitimate case for them to be excluded. So I'm not closing the door on it. I want the conversation to continue. I want more research to be done. I want more science to be brought to the table.
Well, you see, Peter, I want this conversation to end, not to continue, because the bottom line is that you will never scientifically identify a potential advantage that a trans woman has over a biological female. You'll never have that answer. The bottom line is that a trans woman is born a male and therefore does have a male physiology. And I don't think you'll ever do enough Inspector Sherlock Holmes work on this one to get the definitive answer. Kellie-Jay, what's your view?
Well, I'd be very interested if there was a man who had the same bone density and proportions as a woman. I find that quite impossible, since even one of the things we do as women is we recognise a gait. So we can, even without my very strong contact lenses in, I can see a man a mile off just from the way he walks. So I do think we need to sort of park the idea that there are any men on the planet that are exactly the same proportion as a biological woman. That's just nonsense.
But Kellie-Jay, how someone walks is not really a particularly scientific acid test of gender, is it?
No, of course it's not. It's not an acid test of biological sex. It's just one of the many things that are characteristically one sex or another. It's just a frivolous comment. But when it comes to women's sports, it's not just about elite sports. It's about sports right the way through, from school sports, how important it is for girls to have girl-only space, to feel comfortable, to feel like they can make a fool of themselves. The camaraderie of single-sex spaces and sports is really important. The privacy and dignity in those changing rooms. So it's so massive an issue, and it really is a condensed one that I think men can really understand the differences and what women are facing when it comes to the sport debate in particular, because I think everybody can just look at any Olympics that we want to throughout history, and you can see the difference between the male and female competition and competitors.
Kellie-Jay, are you transphobic? Kellie-Jay, important question, Peter. Kellie-Jay, are you transphobic?
Well, transphobia really means right in this moment that I'm not willing to participate in an ideology that I don't think makes any sense, which is to say that men can be women and women can be men. And if that means that I will be labelled transphobic, then so be it. I'm willing to have the label if it means I can speak the truth.
Would you acknowledge that Caitlyn Jenner is a woman and that she is she?
No. No, I think it erases, when we start diluting language, we start erasing rights, as we're seeing just in this conversation. By allowing some men to be called trans women, we're now discussing them participating in our sports. By allowing men to be called trans women, we've now got sexual predators entering into women-only spaces and exposing themselves. So I think it's a really foolish thing that we've done. If a man wants to identify as whatever he wants to call himself, that's absolutely fine. I wish him all the luck in the world.
Kellie-Jay, would you not refer to Caitlyn as she?
No, absolutely not.
I think I think is perhaps rather intolerant of you, because I agree with you about there being two genders, and I think that trans women participating in women's sport is completely unacceptable. But if I had a colleague, a friend, or a family member that identified by a different gender, then I would refer to them with that chosen gendered pronoun.
And that's entirely up to you. And I wouldn't go out of my way to make someone feel uncomfortable. So I'd probably use, I don't know, they, if they were in front of me. But it's very rare that we talk about somebody's pronouns in front of them. I don't really feel that I have to be compelled to use language that I don't feel makes sense. And so I don't do it.
Peter.
Can I just give you just a practical example? I have a friend. She is a trans woman and she plays football. She is one of the smallest women on the team. She is towered over by some of the biological women on that team. So she's a classic example of why we shouldn't generalize. We got to really, really be careful before we start excluding people.
But what happens?
And I just think that
Peter, what happens if Cristiano Ronaldo? What if Cristiano Ronaldo identifies as Christine Ronaldo and plays in women's football? It'll be like 27-0 at the end of 90 minutes.
Well, I think there probably would be scientific evidence to say that Cristiano Ronaldo had an unfair advantage.
Your entire argument is based on weak, tiny, small, miniature trans women participating in women's sport. You're essentially whitewashing over the fact that predominantly and in large part men are bigger and stronger than women. End of.
Yeah, I agree that in many cases women are smaller, less strong than men. But what I want to say is, in this particular case, this trans woman, she participates with the full acceptance of the rest of the football team, who are, I think, every single one of them biological women. And in terms of the size and strength, the height, the weight, and so on, she is almost the smallest in the team.
Peter, I think
there's no reason why she should be excluded.
You've dodged the question.
Go on, give me the question again then.
Well, the question is, Cristiano Ronaldo identifies as Christine and plays a football match. I mean, going to destroy the opposition.
Yeah, I did answer that.
Sport. Your entire argument's predicated on small male athletes that identify as women.
I did answer that question. I said that if Cristiano Ronaldo did transition and become Christina, then I think it would be pretty clear that she had a significant and unfair advantage.
Well, then
so
what's
that's
the
why
point?
people going back to individual assessment.
What's the point? It's so complicated. We're going to have medical examinations every time a trans woman wants to join a female team.
Well, I think that, as I said, I'm all in favour of there being more research and the amassing of evidence to establish fair rules so that as many trans women as possible can participate on an equal basis with equal respect. All I can say is, in the case of this trans woman who plays football, she's not the biggest or the best by a long shot, but she's there on the team. Other teammates tower over her, but so what? She's accepted. They love her. She loves them. They get on well. Surely that's all that matters.
Final thoughts on this,
Kellie-Jay. Olympic Committee.
Kellie-Jay?
Sorry. Yes.
Kellie-Jay, she, her. Go for it.
What my final thoughts?
Please.
I think that the International Olympic Committee has really badly let women down. Any woman that loses her place to a man in female sports who gets to the Olympics, who's trained her entire life, who loses out to what is often, as Peter has simply described, a mediocre man, then I think it's an absolute travesty. We've already seen that at the Olympics in the last year. Laurel Hubbard took the place of one of the Ireland women. And so, you know, it's just balmy. Nobody thinks that men should be competing in women's sports. Common sense tells us all that is just a ridiculous idea.
Laurel Hubbard mentioned Laurel Hubbard. She represented New Zealand at the Olympics, and she won the New Zealand Female Sports Performer of the Year. Kellyanne, reaction to that? Female Sports Star of the Year for New Zealand.
Well, it's outrageous, isn't it? By the way, it's Kellie-Jay. But
sorry, apologies.
I feel misnamed. It's outrageous, isn't it? Because you know, Caitlyn Jenner, I think, won the Woman of the Year, and he hadn't even been a woman for a whole year when he won that award. So, should Laurel Hubbard have won any sort of sporting award? I don't really think so, and certainly not a sporting award that should have gone to an actual woman. It's crazy.
Peter Tatchell, your final thoughts on this?
Well, my final thought is that I also have a different campaign going. For many years, I've argued that the automatic ban on women competing in, for example, football, I think is totally wrong. The Premier League or the Football Association has a ban on women competing in organised football in this country. And a local team that did take on a very talented woman player was actually fined by the Football Association for allowing a woman to compete, even though she had the merit, the talent, the skill and the strength. Now, I think there should be no automatic ban for women playing in the Premier League. If they are suitable, if they can qualify, gender should not be a reason for excluding them.
I'm your number one fan, but that's a nonsense. There's no woman that's going to make it into a Premier League team. Maybe Arsenal, but seriously, the rest, absolutely no chance. But listen, thank you so much for sharing both of your thoughts. Peter, we love the documentary. It's out now on Netflix, Being Peter Tatchell. It's a credit to you and your career. And my profound thanks to Kellie-Jay Keen. Kellie-Jay, it was great to have you on the programme. Please come back again soon. Kellie-Jay is the founder of Standing for Women, a very, very interesting organisation. Take a look at what they do online.